You're all set. You're all set.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Paint Group Joy of SharePoint Illuminating Microsoft 365 webinar. Happy day after Memorial Day. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend, honored our vets, remembered those that have laid down their lives, and now we're back to work, back to the wonders of Microsoft 365. Today, we're going to explore the possibilities of Microsoft Forms. And I think, Richard, what do you think? This feels like it might be a little overlooked when we start looking at all the really robust tools that are out there, because it's a little simple, but it gets better all the time, right?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think this is one that either some people are interested or some people just pass it right up the bat. So, yeah.
So we're going to talk about it today. Maybe show you some things you didn't know you could do with Microsoft 365 Forms. If you've never joined us before, so glad you're here. I am Joy Apple, aka Joy of SharePoint. I'm a modern workplace strategist at Paint Group, and I also do some training here and there along the way too. I've been working with Microsoft toys for a little over 11, actually, no, going on 12 years.
Wow.
I'm old, Richard. But Richard, he's also, I'm even kind of old. I got a birthday coming up. I'm old, dude. Richard is also a modern workplace strategist. He's my work twin. How you doing today, Richard?
Doing really well, thanks. Enjoyed the long weekend and then back at it, like you said. So good afternoon, everybody. Yep, I'm Richard Calderon, also with Paint, and as Joy said, we're workplace twins. So ditto to everything that she says, basically. And yeah, also been doing this a really long time, which is why we wanted to have these webinar series and bring at least the things that we know and we love to be able to share with all of you here today. So today we're going to focus in on Microsoft Forms. As Joy said, it's one of those ones that sometimes can get overlooked, but really has some extreme value, especially when you find specific use cases that you can utilize it for. So we always start off with a little bit of a poll, and not ironically, in this case, the poll, if you have been joining our webinars in the past, is actually something that we have constructed quite simply in Microsoft Forms. So we are going to talk about more of that here today. We only have a couple of quick questions here. Number one, we'd just like to know who's who in the zoo. So if you would let us know who you are in attendance today, just based off of your job function and role. And then also just kind of interested to know what, if any, online survey tools might you have some familiarity with. And so I'm going to go ahead and flip over to the responses side here and see if we start getting a little bit of feedback. You can get to this survey, by the way, a couple of different ways. There should be a link in the Q&A panel that you can just click and it'll crack open your web browser and you can just fill it out there. Also, I have displayed here on the screen a QR code that if you happen to have your mobile device handy and it's just something you just would like to do that way, you can always just point your camera right at that QR code right there and it'll pop up the screen, pop up a browser rather, I should say, on your device to be able to take this survey. And so we're not getting any responses just yet, but we'll see if we start getting some interactions going on here. How about you, Joy? Anything that you've ever used before other than Microsoft Forms, or even seen customers like really just, this is the tool of choice they tend to use for surveys?
Do me a favor, flip back. I'm being lazy. Flip back to those questions. Let me, because I didn't survey monkeys on there. Microsoft Forms, obviously.
Yeah.
So there are two others that come to mind.
Yeah.
Excel. How many times do you see people send out Excel to ask questions and get answers? A lot. And I called, guys, I want you to know, gals, everyone joining the webinar, I called Richard out on this just before we went live, and he said, he put his foot down. He would not alter the form. What about SharePoint lists? What about those SharePoint lists that were so clunky? And then you really couldn't do a good template. You had to go clean out all the answers to reuse it. But man, back in the day, uphill in the snow, barefoot, both ways, we used lists.
Yeah, there definitely was a thing in SharePoint at one time for being able to get create some simple quote unquote surveys and then be able to get that feedback back. But yeah, times have changed. Things have evolved quite a bit.
Times have changed.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
there seems to be some issue with the link.
Oh, here we go. We got some stuff coming in. Let's throw that QR code up again, maybe.
Yeah, there we go.
Sure. There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, we're getting some in now. So thanks everybody who is able to
Perfect.
participate. Okay. Looks like it's all queued up now here. Everything's kind of jumping in. So great to know. We've got a number of IT pros here on the line today. So welcome everybody again. Some folks from the business, in management, and then it looks like overwhelmingly, which is not a surprise, quite honestly, got a number of folks that are familiar with SurveyMonkey and have used that. I mean, that's a pretty, industry standard survey tool, I would say. Some are using Forms, some are using Google Forms as well too, and then some other are going to be interested to see what that is as well too. So thanks again for taking the poll. Appreciate that, you guys. If you would like, feel free to just chime in on that anywhere along the way as well too, which I see more and more responses coming in. So great, thank you for that.
Ooh, SurveyMonkey in the lead.
That's right, yeah. So let's talk.
We're going to change that after
today. Yeah. If anything, in terms of what you already have invested in terms of Microsoft 365, that's for sure. So yeah, so let's talk just a little bit about forms. So again, if this is something that you've just not really looked at much before, but for those of you that have, it is built right into Microsoft 365. So it is one of the many applications and services that are on that platform. And it's primarily used for being able to very easily collect information, whether it be customer feedback or some ideas of some sorts, net promoter score. I mean, you name it. You can use them internally to be able to ensure that you're tracking who's responding to the polls. And then just like we're doing just now, you can also have those surveys or polls be able to be accessed anonymously, so you can just share them with anybody across the internet and have that data to be able to collect. So educational institutions also certainly use it for quizzes and so forth. I don't use them a whole lot for quizzing. I don't know about you, Joy, if you ever create any quizzes for customers. I don't. Yeah, I find that our commercial customers they don't tend to like to be quizzed on things we're asking them, I guess. But but hopefully they're learning all these great things nonetheless. Just don't check my answers on them. But so here's an example of how you might be able to simply create a survey here. And I'm going to shoot this back over to Joy, actually, whose idea this one was. Okay, I think this is a really clever idea.
So this is showing my age a little bit. And those of you, if you remember it, please come into chat. I would love to know your favorite episode. But every time I hear the word survey, I flash back to my preteen, early teenage years. I remember the Animaniacs. Would you like to take a survey? And Stacy, I see your face. She's digging it. So take a survey. It's so easy. I built this form driving on the highway. What day was it? Saturday, Richard? I think it took me less than 5 minutes.
Were you driving?
I wasn't driving.
Okay, just making sure.
I was in the passenger seat.
Okay, good.
It took me longer to go Google and find the questions for the survey of, do you eat beans? Do you want to see a new movie starring George Wendt? Do you want to eat beans with George Wendt? Best episode ever.
Yeah.
But as I was going, it was really funny. When I asked that question, it actually has easy buttons there to put your answers for yes, no, maybe.
Yep.
You don't even have to type it. Super easy.
Yeah, Microsoft has done a really great job in being able to make it as easy as possible to create these really simple surveys just like this. So yeah, so glad to hear you weren't doing it while driving, but nonetheless, the fact that you were able to do it while you're in a car, I mean, just shows how easy this is to be able to create these kind of forms.
So easy.
Yeah. And similarly, whether you know it or not, all of these forms are just immediately responsive in terms of what they can do in terms of a web browser, scaling in terms of the different device size. So if you're needing to look at this up on a big screen, like maybe up on a big, huge Surface Hub, what have you, all the way down to a small mobile device, the form is going to appropriately size and allow you to interact with it. So don't have to do anything. It's just built into the tool to be able to do that, which I think is just fantastic. Just a couple of things, and we'll look at some of these actually here today too, that maybe you kind of think to yourself, okay, great, I create a form, and then I shoot somebody a link and then they open a web browser or their mobile device and then they interact with that form. But whether you know it or not, there's also a ton of other ways that Forms is integrated into the Microsoft 365 platform. So, for example, you can create surveys or poll questions within the context of a stream video. Pretty useful. You might want to ask some questions along the way during the video and get some feedback, get some information from users. You can do it through Excel online or through OneDrive. You can also do polls and be able to share quickly in Teams or Outlook. And then for that matter too, if you got a Sharepoint portal, like I know most of you do, you can pretty easily add a Forms web part to a page to be able to either collect responses or to be able to show the results of that poll. Okay, so there's also even a ton more that you can do too, PowerPoint integrations, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we're just going to kind of scratch the surface of some of these here today. So let's bounce over and talk about some of it in Forms. I'm going to start off here in a demo environment. I'm going to show you a couple of other things here real quick. So got my demo up for Megan. Joy and I use these demos all the time because there's just lots of easy things to kind of flip back and forth to. But on this, if you've ever been to this page, this is what they call the Office 365. We're probably going to rebrand it to Microsoft 365 start page or the home page sometime, I would expect. But amongst all these different applications that I'm sure you're probably familiar, you've got one right here that's called Forms. You can also get to it too if you just hit the app launcher, the little waffle iron. If you don't see it immediately in the list, you hit all apps and it will kind of alphabetize these here for you. So there you go, Forms. And so when you go to Forms in the web, it's a very simplified interface. You've got My Forms, Shared Forms, Grouped Forms, and so it kind of depends on where you're wanting to deal with forms, but it's really easy when you're just wanting to start off. Think of it like OneDrive is my stuff. Well, in My Forms, these are just where I want to get started and just experiment and play around with some things. So starting a new form is super easy. You can click a new form. You can also do a quiz. Again, it's going to have slight differences in terms of the interactivity between a quiz and a form. But if you do a new form, it gives you this blank page. And you can just start right off the bat saying, what am I going to title this? So, maybe it's going to be a customer feedback form or something like that. One thing I wanted to point out, because I've been asked this question by other customers, and so I just thought I would bring it up right out of the gate here, is that you have this notion of being able to change the theme of your form because you want it to have a certain color scheme, et cetera. So I'm just going to point this out to you here while I'm on this inputting your title. So you notice this is kind of the default color scheme when you're first creating a form. And you have over here this option that says theme. When you click on it, it gives you these nice kind of pretty colors you can switch it to. When you're switching around, obviously it goes from colors. You can even switch to some of these that are kind of the pre-canned backgrounds and so forth. And if you wanted to, you could even come up with your own custom theme. So you can certainly pick and choose from some of that. But I've been asked before, like, hey, I've seen some other theme ideas that you put on forms before. How did you get to those? And it's not real obvious, but what happens is when you're creating a brand new form, as you're creating a title for the form, based on some keywords that you're putting in the title there, this theme, watch what happens over here. Watch right over here in this area. That little theme bar right there is going to have a little lightning bolt that pops up on that as you're typing a form title. So for example, if I say customer, hasn't done it, well, there actually it already did. So it's kind of guessing what's going on. So I put in customer and I go to theme now, you see there are these different ideas that it came up with here, okay? In addition to the canned sort of color schemes and so forth. So it's got some ideas based on just the keyword customer in this case. So maybe I also, as you notice, I'm gonna delete this and this goes away. As soon as I delete this, there you go, that little lightning bolt goes away. So maybe I do something like evaluation. And this one is one of my favorites because it shows this guy here playing the drums, and that's just near and dear to my heart there. So anyway, the point is, just know that to get to these theme ideas, it takes into account some kind of formula going on behind the scenes as you're typing in a survey or a questionnaire title of some sorts in the form. It's going to start generating these themes. Okay, so just want to bring that up to you right off the bat because I know I get asked that question quite a bit. So again, it could be something else, maybe it's employee feedback form or something like that where you're wanting to gather some data. Again, as you change the keywords, it's going to change these theme ideas here. So maybe it's something like that. You can enter a description optionally. You can also enter in some images. You can do a search for images in this case here off of Bing. You can also look for images off your OneDrive or upload them. So again, you can do all kinds of things here to be able to add images. It's going to eventually just include that image here on the left-hand side. So it's something that just helps brand that form a little bit. You can optionally enter description, and then entering questions is really simple. You just click add new. Now, every time you add new, again, it's going to take in some examples here based off of, there's some artificial intelligent machine learning, crazy AI stuff going on. It's going to take it based off of what you're already putting in as the title of the subject of this form. So as you notice here, so as an employee feedback form, without me even having to say anything, it's already recommending a number of things here based off of templates. So I could just say, okay, I want to pick and choose some of these, or I can just simply say here, I want to add them all. And if I add them all, look at that, how easy that was. It just pops in a whole slew of questions already that might be considered common from a template for an employee feedback form, okay? So all these different types here, this is a choice field. Again, you get all kinds of different things you can get out of this. Obviously, you're putting the question itself. You're putting the choices, you can add more options, you can delete them, you can add what's called an other option. So if I delete that here, you'll see that it says add other right here. So I can add other, which again, some of you just did that here just now in the poll. You can reorder these. So if I want to just, okay, I want this to be higher, I want this to be lower, or whatever it may be. It's super easy to interact with these. You can also copy them for that matter. So if I really just wanted to have a copy of that question, I'll copy it, and then you'll see down here, here's another one, number 2, actually, is an exact copy of that. So I can take that and continue to expand on it or, change the options, but a number of ways just to be really productive here to get going on that. So I can just delete, super easy. And then also rearranging the questions in the list is super easy as well too. As I'm selecting on any of these, I can choose these options to say, move the question up or down. So in this case, I'm going to move this one down. Maybe that's not quite appropriate in an employee feedback form. Maybe you really do want the, hey, what's your job title up at the top? So I can just keep moving it back up. And again, there it goes, right? Moving it to the top. A couple of other things to point out is you certainly can say multiple answers. Again, might not be appropriate here for what is your job title, but for questions that do require or have a need for multiple answers, it'll change it from these little radio buttons. Those of you kind of familiar with this term, a radio button versus checkboxes. If you want to do multiple answers, you can certainly set it as required, which means that the user won't be able to move off of that, either that section or even submit that form until they've filled out any of the questions that are considered required. And then you also have a couple of additional actions here. And again, this settings depends on the question type, but you could shuffle the options here. So if you shuffle the options, it's going to just kind of every single person who comes to this form, it's going to randomize the order of these. So it's not always going to show the same. For that matter, if you actually were able to submit the form and view it twice, it would likely shuffle these and not show them to you the same. So you can shuffle the options. You can change this from being, in this case, these little radio buttons to a drop-down option here. And I'll show you what that looks like in a preview in a moment. You can also add subtitles. I think that's useful. So, please enter, your selection or something like that. But when you do that, it's going to show some additional information underneath the question itself. So I find that useful. And then there's branching. So again, those of you that come from the SurveyMonkey experience or other tools, yeah, do you have a comment there?
We have a slew of questions already, and one of them was about adding conditional.
Oh yeah.
Can you do those kinds of things? So just like in SurveyMonkey, that whole SurveyMonkey experience where you have conditional questions. If you answer yes to one thing, then a whole slew of questions to answer. If you answer no, then a whole different set of options set up.
That's exactly right. Yep. So you do have the ability to do branching based off of what they chose in a given question. So just like Stacy said, so in that example here, like if I did branching, what it's going to give me the options to say is, if they chose this one, then go to some next question. And so maybe I've got certain questions that I want a person who's identified themselves as a team lead to respond to, or I've got certain questions for someone who's identified as a senior manager that I want them to respond to. So I want the ability to be able to branch off into other areas. And so, so the way that you do that again is you come into the question itself. Actually, let me go back. you come into the question itself. And so when you hit those little more options, there's an option for add branching. Okay.
And that's a great way to keep forms clean, because let's say this form has 100 questions on it, and we don't really want our users to have to scroll through 100 either. Maybe we only figure most people only address a third of the questions on the form, so it just keeps that nice and clean.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a few other questions.
Sure.
Okay, so is there a way to number questions or not number questions in forms?
Number them in terms of
a question 1, question 2, question 3,
or turn off the numbering. I think
exactly.
Question. So it says 1, 2, 3. Can we just get rid of the 1, 2, 3?
Exactly.
I don't know that I've ever seen that. I think I've always seen the numbers in this case. Although I can certainly see there being some use cases for why you might not want to have the numbers in this case. But I guess I think of it generally as if I'm interacting with someone and saying, okay, it would be great if you gave me some feedback, and I'm really, really interested in your feedback, specifically on questions 10 and 12, right? That having the numbers there certainly helps simplify the target of which questions. Otherwise, I have to express what questions specifically I'm asking for. But yeah, if you would add maybe some additional context in the Q&A as for why you're thinking about maybe not wanting to have the numbers, that would help. We can talk about that some more too. Other questions at the moment, Stacy?
Yeah, anything on the roadmap to be able to organize forms?
Organize them. I want to think how to organize them is the question, though. Yeah, maybe we need a little bit more context.
Okay, let me see if I can get some more context on that question.
Yeah.
Is Immersive Reader available on a public-facing form, or do you have to be logged into a Microsoft user account?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, actually. We'll have to sidebar that one and dig into that a little bit more regarding Immersive Reader. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
And the demo that you're using, are you using just Forms, or is this and Forms on the web, or is this Forms Pro?
This is just straight up Forms. It's definitely not Forms Pro. So anyone who has an eligible Microsoft 365 subscription that is including Microsoft Forms, that's exactly what I'm demoing here. And just briefly in contrast, so I actually don't have really any practical experience with Forms Pro, for that matter, which is another level enterprise forms tool for enterprise customers that are willing to pay for the additional capabilities that you get with that. And some of them that I'm aware of are you get deeper analytics, it's more integrated with Dynamics 365. So there's a number of things in Forms Pro that you get above and beyond just Microsoft Forms. But again, I don't have any practical experience with that. I don't know if you do or not either, Joy, if you've ever dealt with that with customers just yet.
I have not. I've not really worked on that side of it. I will say on the organization piece, there's nothing specific on the roadmap about it. And I have been kind of going and looking at the roadmap real quick just to see if anything's been added. The only thing I can see that might aid in any kind of organization, because they have like My Forms and Group Forms. Right. The feature that's in the process of rolling out, it might already be complete now, is specific user sharing for collaboration, where you can say these people can edit and contribute or what have you. That might give you a little bit better organization of who has this form, who can do what with it, but nothing specifically about organizing your forms in a specific way.
Yeah, and I will show you briefly, just again on the organization topic. I'll show you under Pate's tenant here. I mentioned earlier that when you are initially starting off, just kind of trialing this stuff out for yourself, by and large, just start on the My Forms tab, create a new form, and just start experimenting around. But you also have this notion of what are called group forms. So I'm just going to give you some examples here. So there are group forms based off of Microsoft 365 groups. In this case, a number of these here are all created based off of Microsoft Teams. So there are Microsoft 365 groups that are created from Teams. And so as an example here, I'll go into training. So you see I've got a form here that's associated with this group. And so this is a template that we're utilizing for doing some training evaluation. And I'll just kind of scroll through here to show some of the, again, very similar capabilities here. You've got some Likert scale type form questions. Obviously, you've got multiple choice or choice questions rather, text-based questions. But you have the ability to be able to move your forms when you create them either under My Form, or even if you create them in group forms, you can move them into groups so that they basically become more organized, I guess, if you will, tied to that particular group. And that also then allows the group to be able to have visibility. When you're just creating a form in My Forms, that's just tied to you. Again, just like OneDrive, where it's private to you unless you share it with others. If you are creating a form either in a group or then you move a form from My Forms to a group, it then makes that visible to everybody in the group that way. Okay, so just an FYI that's maybe another thought around organizing forms in this case.
Do forms give any text formatting options?
Text formatting options.
Yeah.
You mean like in terms of being able to test out your form?
No, text, like font formatting.
Oh, text formatting. Not that I've seen in what let's just call basic forms. I believe, and again, I don't have any practical experience to share here, but I believe in Forms Pro, it does include additional, again, capabilities, features, which is inclusive of being able to do text formatting, change the font of the text, et cetera, and things like that. That's, again, Microsoft tends to reserve those things for those higher level paid services like Forms Pro. Not something I've seen inside of just Forms at the moment.
And making a question or answer required.
Yes. Yeah, that was something I might have glossed over that a minute ago, but right here, you absolutely have the ability to be able to set for a question whether or not you want that to be required or not. So again, it's as simple as just flipping that little switch on the question itself. And so something kind of just a practical tip to share is that when you are setting up your form, let me kind of pivot over to some other aspects about administration of the form here at the moment. So when you're setting up your form, you have the ability to be able to choose kind of two security levels or two visibility levels of the form itself. You can say that I really only need this to be an internal facing form, so only people inside my organization, that is the people that are inside your Microsoft 365 tenant, can respond. And so you'll notice that it says sign in is required for that. Or you certainly can choose this other option which says anyone with the link can respond. And that's how you can send this out over the web, really, like exactly how we did just now when we were creating the poll, is we just created it where anyone with the link can respond. You just copy this link right here, just click the copy button, and then you can just paste that away into anything you want. Send it in an email, or in our case, we pasted in the Q&A panel and so forth. And then anybody who has that link now can respond. So a practical tip, just as it relates to the required field, if you will, is if you are doing anonymous facing forms, or if you're creating forms where anyone can respond, but you need to be able to ensure that you can capture the information in that particular form that is inclusive of some identity information of the user. At the very least, you might want to put a required field for name, maybe a required field for email address, so that when that person who's outside your org is submitting the data in that form, they're at least required to put some information there. Now, obviously, you can't. There's no way you can enforce that they're going to actually put their real name or their real email address in there, but you can at the very least put that it's a required field. And that's just a tip that I would suggest for doing when you're going to send them outside of your organization. Okay. Other questions, Stacy, so far? This is great.
There's time to so on the subject of organizing forms, when you open the home page and you have a lot of, can you organize them by project at a company? That's one thing.
So again, what I was kind of alluding to is I have not seen any way like here on my forms where I can kind of tag my forms, even just to be able to organize. So if I have, 50 or so forms that I've built under my forms and they're all just showing here, I haven't seen anywhere, and if any of you have seen this, please let us know, but I haven't seen anywhere where I can tag these forms to be able to then organize them here. But for the scenario that is being asked in this question, one thought might potentially be, and again, there's a whole lot of it depends here, but one thought is if you're creating teams in Microsoft Teams, or even, SharePoint sites or anything that's connected to a Microsoft 365 group, if you're creating them per project, which is, a potentially reasonable way to organize teams in this case, you could then potentially organize your forms per those groups so that they would show up that way under group forms. Again, so that, like in this example here, this demo user is a member of all of these various teams. Well, potentially these could be project-based teams. And if they were project-based teams, then you could absolutely just organize the forms in these various groups and that would work. But again, that's more of a it depends answer because there's a whole lot of devil in the details there as to how you might organize that. Any comments on that too, Joy? Just kind of thoughts about project-based teams, or, whether you see that to be a good or bad thing, overkill, or,
I don't know that it's overkill because as we've seen, especially the state of the world today, the adoption of teams has skyrocketed because we're working remotely more, and we're all in teams more, so there's a lot of groups. I like that. If you're not there yet, or you're like, but hey, within my group we got forms, people. Naming convention. Think back to your SharePoint best practices that we've been with for a long time now. Naming conventions. What type of form is it? Maybe that's your prefix for the title of your form. Is that rigid? Does it feel old-fashioned? Yes. But you see on Richard's screen where it says search for form. You type in the type of form, boom. Search is going to start doing the work for you.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrangle the cats sometimes and enforce naming conventions. So, but, have a conversation, communicate, and see if maybe that can help until perhaps we all go to the user voice after this webinar today and say, hey, Microsoft, give me a way to organize my forms better, people.
Sure. Yeah. That's a great point. Always encourage the use of those user voice sites. And if you're not familiar with that, we can certainly send the link out to that as well too. But as a way for you to be able to go and just voice your opinion about capabilities in the tool, all the Microsoft engineering teams for the various different products on the platform actively monitor and respond. And that's honestly quite a bit of how they carve the roadmap is from the input they're getting from all of you through user voice. I will point out just one thing because I keep mentioning it here. So if I wanted to, so I've got this in my forms, if I wanted to click here, the little dot here, this is where I can say move, okay? So if I decided I wanted to move, you notice it gives me a list over here of all of the Microsoft 365 groups, in this case, to which I could move this form. And so maybe an employee feedback form makes sense to go under HR, for example. So I just say HR and hit move. In a second, that form goes poof from my forms and it's gone. And if I go to group forms now and I go and look in HR, you notice that now it says total of one form. And so now that form is here, okay? Now this entire group of 20 people in this group have access to that form. It's visible to them. You can consider it more shared ownership. It's no longer something that I just wanted to create and have it kind of siloed to myself. I could create it and now share it out with the group, okay?
Can I make an observation, Richard?
Sure.
That sure feels a lot like me, one person in OneDrive, working on something for my team, my department, my business unit, and then going, okay, now it's complete. Maybe I've gotten some feedback. I've had a couple of people test the logic.
Yep.
Now it's appropriate to move it like I would my OneDrive to SharePoint and any Teams connected teams, right? Now I'm moving it from my forms to my group.
Absolutely. Exact perfect paradigm for that here. So, we talked a lot in some of the previous webinars about the how great OneDrive is in terms of just really changing the way that you work and think about where your files are. But being able to move files from OneDrive to SharePoint as a way to get from my stuff to our stuff, same exact concept here, right? So I'm creating my form initially, just sort of getting it ready. And when I'm at the point that I'm ready to go ahead and share it with everybody else, it's trivial again to move it into a group in this case. So super, super handy and useful to do in that case. Okay, other questions? It sounds like we might have some more.
Yeah, so when you're accessing survey results outside of forms, can you do that? Can you do that? Can you, like, such as in Power BI or in Excel?
You definitely can easily in Excel. I'll give you an example of that, which then, in my opinion, means you could certainly do it in Power BI if you then needed to connect Power BI to Excel as the source of the information in this case. But I'll give you an example here. Let me see about something I can kind of show you. Okay, I will show you a peek behind the covers here a little bit for customer mine. Shout out to a customer here in Austin, Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority. So here is a form to which I've collected some responses. You'll notice here on this tab, I've got 6 responses to this form. It tells me that the form is still active, which by the way means that I have a way that I can close the form. So if I want to set a start and an end time of when I want to collect responses just on that topic, I can do that up here by going into settings. When I go into settings of the form, notice I've got a few things I can choose. Number one, there's that first thing that we mentioned earlier about like only people in my org, and if so, do I want to make sure I record their name? Do I want to make sure that that one person can only submit one response rather than skewing the results by submitting more than one response to the form? Or do I want to do it where anyone can, and that's how you do it external to your organization? And there's a whole bunch of other options you can set here, of which the ones I was mentioning here is you can do a start and an end date. So you can kind of schedule the form, if you will, for when is it going to be ready to accept responses. So I want to set it to where it can be available immediately to accept responses. And I want to set to where I'm going to give everybody the ability to do it to the end of the day, Friday, 5 p.m. on Friday, and that's it. Okay. Once that's the case, anybody who clicks that link is just going to get a message that says this form is closed, essentially. Thanks anyway, but we've essentially gathered the feedback we need. So in addition to being able to see very quickly some visualization, and this is all built in out of the box, by the way, there's nothing that we customize at all for this, just showing you the results of the form submissions. You notice right here is the big open in Excel option, okay? So if you have this here, you can just simply open the data here. This is the raw data itself for the form. All of the questions itself, what they submitted, etc. So then you've got all that data in Excel, and you can now go and slice and dice and do other things with it. And clearly, again, if you wanted to attach it to Power BI as the source, in this case, you can do that as well. Okay. Good deal. Other questions?
Ending a branch of questions, do you have to, is there something else that you have to do? But if you're saying yes and you go to questions 7, 8, and 9, and if you say no, 4, 5, 6, and does it end right there? Or is there something else that you need to do in ending a branch of questions?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example here. So again, if I go to one question, I'm on back on this employee feedback form. And if I go to one question and I just decide on this one, I want a branch here. So you go into hit the dot, go into the question, hit the dot right here, and then choose add branching. So effectively, it's going to say go to, if they choose this option, go to something. So it's either going to give you a list of all of the questions that you already have to basically branch to, or the other default option is just simply to the end of the form. So those are basically your choices here. So in my experience, the way I've kind of gone through this is I have to kind of go back and forth a little bit. I have to think to myself, well, I know I want this to be a branched question. I want this to go somewhere else based off of if they click this. And I might not have necessarily created the questions that I want them to go to yet. So you can't, you're chicken and the egg thing, because you won't be able to go here and actually choose the questions until you create them. So oftentimes I just kind of go through this process and I say, okay, if I click here, I need something. So I'll go stub out a question. I'll say, okay, here on the end, actually I'm gonna go back. Here on the end, I want to say add a new question, and I'm just gonna, if I know what kind of a question it is, maybe it's just simply some text. That's the other key, is you have to kind of know the data type. You have to know the question type if you're even just going to stub it out, because you can't easily switch to a different data type. But you can basically just say, okay, I know, this is going to be the where the branch ends. for, you know, the choice for team lead kind of thing. And that's where that's going to be. And then maybe I move this down somewhere, you know, much further down the form here near the end. So in that case, then here, when I say, okay, I want to do branching, and when they choose this option, I want this to go down to where the branch ends for team lead. I want to choose that essentially. So now when you do this, essentially, you're going to, I'm going to preview this form. We hadn't talked about this yet, but you very easily can preview your forms. When you do that, now you can see what the experience is going to be like for the user. In this case, this is what they look like. This is what it looks like when they've got their browser available to them. You can also see what it looks like if they're just looking on mobile. I think that's super slick, that you can just get a sense of what that's going to look like there. But based on the selection here, if I say team lead, notice that now I click that and then that opens up that branch, okay? If I choose any of the other ones, notice it, because I didn't change it, it's just going to go to the next question in this case. But if I choose this one, it's going to go straight to the branch ends for team lead, and that actually puts it as number 2, because in this case, that really is the only second question in that case. So you can enter the answer and submit it, okay? So there's, again, this is one of those where I think you just need to get your hands in there, play around with the branching a little bit, and sort of figure out what makes sense in terms of how that works.
I would say too, with a lot of branching logic, it's just like the Legend of Zelda. It's dangerous to go alone. Draft a friend, have them, because you can't edit your own stuff, right? Have someone go through the form because it feels right to you, and they'll go, it just went to it just ended. Is that right? You're like, oh no, hang on. So get a friend.
Yeah, it is true. You know, and we didn't get to talking about some of these other features yet, but there's a capability in forms that I think is really useful that they call sections. And so you can say add new, and there's a choice here that says a section. So if you want to add a section, you can actually segment the questions based off of a grouping of them. So, you know, this is going to be, you know, about me or something like that is the name of the section. And so when you insert a section, basically what you're doing is you're allowing that to be paginated, or being able to have paging, if you will, in the form experience itself. So I'll give you an example again. If I now have the section 1 and section 2, you notice that when I preview that, it gives me a next button. Okay, so rather than just scrolling down the form, and again, if I have 50 questions or whatever, it's just going to be this ever scrolling form, I can say that I want this to be sectioned off. So I can create this, I can choose this option, hit next, and then it goes into the next section, which you see was titled here about me. Again, I haven't created any more sections, so this is just a long paging thing. But you can segment this into various sections. As a matter of fact, I did do that here on this form for training. So as an example here, if I preview this, you notice that I've got a section, well, interestingly enough, one that I called about me. So I said optional because I didn't want to pressure people into having to give me their name and so forth in that. But if they fill this out and go next, so here's the next section. So here's the next sort of logical set of questions that I wanted people to answer in terms of the course, evaluating the course itself. Was it too long? Was it too short? Did you like anything? Did you have any suggestions? Hit next. Now this is the trainer evaluation. Of course, I'm always hoping for excellent, but I also want the honest feedback. You know, was it average? Was it poor? What were some ways that we could do better, and what things did we do well? Next. And then any other information. And here's a branching question. So would you be interested in additional training sessions from Pate? If no, you're done. Anything else you want to know? Great. But if yes, it's as simple as sure. Which other training sessions would you be interested in? Okay, so I'm interested in some other training. And then anything else you'd like to know, and hit submit. Okay, so pretty useful in my opinion to have the sectioning also, because it gives you that nice next experience that I think a lot of people are used to.
Can we save forms as a template?
You can sort of. So you'll notice that I called this one template. And so what you really end up doing is you create a form, then you end up going into the share button here that says share, and I want to share this as a template. So there is an option that says share as a template. This doesn't work quite like you would intuitively think it works, quite honestly, but I'll show you what it does. What you do is you say anyone in this link can duplicate. So you copy this, and then you you paste that into, a Teams chat or a Teams channel, or, you basically give people the link that you just created. And so then what happens then is they go and log in. So I'm going to log in just for grins as a totally different demo user. I'm going to log in as this teammate of Megan's named Nestor. And so now just in my browser, I'm just going to paste in this link. So that's the link that was the share as a template. And when I hit enter, what it does is it just opens this up and says, are you ready to create your own version of this? And if so, hit this button to say duplicate it. And then now it takes me to my forms. Well, of course, now it's going to force me to log in. But anyway, now it would take me to my forms with a copy of that form ready for me to start editing as my own, essentially. Okay. So to me, again, that's a little unintuitive. It's not quite templating in the way I normally would think about sharing a template or creating a template, but it does work, essentially. So yeah, so what you end up doing, again, is you just have to hit share as a template, and then when someone has that URL, it will effectively allow them to duplicate it, which is from the template.
More questions. You ready?
Yeah.
Does the link to the form change if you move it to a group?
It does not. It does not. It's still just the form. So the good news is all of these links here. Let me give you an example of this where I can share it here real quick. I'm going to go do the good old trusty notepad view here, and or I can. It's always when you're trying to do something that you think is simple, and it doesn't end up showing as simple.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's just the way it goes.
Yep.
So let's do this again. And all
Demo
I want
gods
to
are
do,
with you.
yeah, exactly. And of course now, thank you for joining. No, I'm just kidding. So let's pull this over here. Okay, so I've got Notepad. I'm going to make it big so I can just show just this raw text. And so here is that URL. Okay, that URL here is, not the prettiest by any means as far as the URL goes, but it is basically forums.office.com/pages/response-page.aspx, and then this big identifier. Okay, so that's it. So that big identifier now follows that form around, no matter where I'm moving it. If I'm sharing it, or if it's in my forms, or if I moved it to one group, or if I moved it over to another group, it doesn't really matter. That form ID is essentially going to stay the same at that point. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty useful.
Ready for some more?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you change the format of the results charts, such as like the pie, bar, line, etc.? And can you export to a PDF report? All or selected questions?
Yeah. So I haven't seen a way to be able to change the display of the output. Let me give an example of that again. So if I'm looking at a form that actually has some data in it, I'll go back to the one that I was on here again. If I go back to this form and show the results data here, the responses, I don't know of a way to be able to change this. I think, again, built into the tool is just these kind of out-of-the-box visualizations. And again, it's going to be dependent on the form question type. So in this case, this is a Likert scale. These are just simply choice questions. This is straight up text. And so while I think that would certainly be useful, and we'll have to look into see whether Forms Pro allows for that, this is kind of what you get, unfortunately. But then to answer the second part of the question, yeah, you definitely have a couple of other ways that you can get the data out, of which one of them is just simply to create what's called a summary link, or you can print a summary. So if you do print a summary in this case, for example, you can certainly, again, kind of depends on how you have your environment set up. Oh, well, there it goes. It was trying. I just wasn't patient enough. So I hit print summary. How you have your PC set up and so forth, if you've got it to where it can just immediately print to a PDF, or I tend to send my summaries to OneNote, so I've got a kind of running list of all of the output of OneNote. But again, if you have save as PDF, you can certainly do that. or you could do, print to Microsoft Print to PDF, or I can obviously print it to a printer. But if I do that, save to PDF, you notice what it's going to do is it's going to look like, anybody know any good jokes? But basically, yeah, it's just going to look like a PDF version of the response data. Right? Okay. So you do have the ability to be able to do that. So that you could just print it out. Again, I tend to do it to OneNote so that I've kind of got it all collected in one place, but you can absolutely do them per results to PDF. And then the other one, since I mentioned it, when you create a summary link, what you're doing is you're allowing others in the organization to be able to see this exact page, even if they're not a member of this group or what have you. So, think of that typically as the leadership team, executives, whomever you want to be able to show off the responses to the feedback which you've collected. You can generate this summary link and then be able to just send this to them. They click on that and then they'll be able to just easily see the results of this particular survey. Okay.
Okay, we have 2 more questions.
Sure.
Okay, so what happens to the form that's owned by an employee who is now no longer with the company?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it probably works the same way as a lot of the other services do, where someone who is an administrator of Microsoft 365 will have the ability to be able to effectively go in as that user or sign in with the ability to personate that user, if you will, and then get to that form and then be able to relocate that form more than likely into a group. Quite honestly, I'm guessing at that one. I don't know if you know, Joy, off the top of your head or not, but I'm kind of guessing that administratively there would be somebody that had the ability to get to that data.
I would say so. Much like how, I'm going back to my OneDrive reference, right? Window of time, you can reassign an individual's OneDrive, email, all that fun stuff to a manager or whoever makes sense. So
yeah, I mean, I guess at the very least, although I don't know that this is the right practice or not. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be an IT admin in this case, but at the very least, you could, reset that user's password to a known password now, and then log in as that user. So you're basically impersonating that user, and then now you've got access to their forms, right? So, but I'm kind of guessing at that one. If anybody on the line who is in an IT kind of knows that one more definitively, please share with us. We'd love to know.
Okay, I have a last question and then I have an update.
Sure.
So you mentioned sectioning before. Can you do conditional branching in those sections or no?
Conditional branching within the section?
Well, either within the section or to be able to get to the section.
Yes, but I don't think it branches at the section. I think it just branches at the question.
Okay.
So let me give an example of that. So here I've got 3 questions in this section, and then question 4 starts in the next section. So if I wanted to, I could branch from here and say add branching, but the branching is going to effectively only let me go to, well, it does say questions in the current and other sections. So that's kind of nice. I didn't realize it did that. So thanks for that question. That is really informative in that I could absolutely just go branching and jump to a section in this case, which I think is really neat to be able to do that in this case. So cool, good to know. So you can either do that within questions in the section, or you can jump to other sections. It doesn't look like you can just jump to a question in a section, but that also kind of makes sense to me, actually, quite frankly. Like if you're going to branch, you're probably going to branch to a section and not branch to like the 3rd question in that section, which might just be a little disorienting. Cool, great question, thank you.
The Immersive Reader is not available yet, but it's in the works.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for sharing that information.
And one last thing, is can you create a SharePoint form from a SharePoint list?
A SharePoint?
Not SharePoint. Can you create a form from a SharePoint list?
From a SharePoint list. You can create a form. Well, I didn't get to many of these things, but you can create forms inside of Teams connected SharePoint libraries. And And, we might just end up having to peel off a whole other webinar on the integration ones, quite honestly, because I mentioned, and I'm going to pull this back up here because I think it's worth mentioning. So,
Stacey, I think we have a new bonus feature.
I love it.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other things that integrate with forms, and I kind of just glossed over this earlier, I think, but that you can create a form in your OneDrive, which basically is going to create an Excel document. It's going to create an Excel file in your OneDrive that is just connected directly to the form results that are being submitted. So you saw how a minute ago you could say, I want to export this to Excel. Well, creating a form in OneDrive is just going to skip that step. It's going to automatically create that Excel document for you with the form interface on top of it, so that when people are submitting the data for the form, you can see in real time the data that's showing up in the Excel workbook. Again, that'll be something we can showcase here when we kind of do this part 2, if you will, of this webinar. But so similarly, you can do that also in a SharePoint document library, not in OneDrive, because OneDrive is me, SharePoint is we, right? You can do that in a SharePoint document library, but it has to be, the caveat, it has to be a Teams connected, or excuse me, a Microsoft 365 group connected SharePoint site that you can do that with. When you do that, you'll effectively get, I'll just flip over to this here. I'll tease you, how's that? I'll tease you a little bit with the time we have left. So I mentioned to you that you can do this in OneDrive. You can create what they call forms for Excel, which to me, I don't know, I get it. It's creating an Excel workbook, but calling it forms for Excel inside of OneDrive is slightly confusing to me. But the thing that a lot of people don't think about doing when you hit new, you always think about uploading, you always think about syncing and that kind of stuff in OneDrive, but few people really spend much time thinking about doing new here. But when you click on new, one of the several options is this option that says forms for Excel. Okay. So when you click forms for Excel, I'm going to say, customer feedback. And lo and behold, when you create that, automatically what it does is it bounces you over to forms. So you're like, wait a minute, I just saw this forms for Excel. Like, where's Excel? And now I'm in forms. So anyway, that's what it does. If you go back to your OneDrive, what it actually creates here is it creates right there, customer feedback. It created that form. So when I click on that, it's actually going to, again, this is connected to the form. So as I'm creating new questions, those columns are going to start to show up here, and then I'll have that data. Anyway, that's just OneDrive. However, if you go into any of these libraries that are also connected, so again, OneDrive, your single place for all your files in Microsoft 365, right? So I can come here, let's say sales and marketing, and if I go into, again, this is like a window into that SharePoint site. It's a window into the libraries on that SharePoint site. So there's a documents library there, and not surprisingly, there are folders for every channel that are in that particular library because Teams connected. But you can also, from here, you can say new forms for Excel, okay? So similarly here, you can create a form inside of the SharePoint library, which you can then surface as a web part on your SharePoint site to be able to collect data from the team or whomever. Pretty cool, I think, to be able to do that. So anyway, just teasing you a little bit with some of these integrations, because again, I think that there's some really useful stuff. Connection to Stream, even doing these like simple polls and Teams and Outlook and so forth. So we can talk about that some more for sure.
And just, okay. I'll add as we flip to our contact information. Remember, if you need that data to live in SharePoint, not in an Excel spreadsheet in SharePoint, every time you create a list and you ask people questions, that thing they use to give you the answers is a form. And at the top of that form, there's a link. So you can send just that new item form to people. Is it gorgeous? No. Can you customize it in Power Apps? Yes, you can. But if it's a SharePoint, got to stay in SharePoint requirement. Remember, your new item is a form for lists.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, well, gosh, we just, it seemed like an hour just went by quickly for us, but that's great. Thanks for all the questions. Keep them coming. Again, it looks like maybe we'll try to do sort of a part 2 of this where we dive in more into the integrations of forms with other parts of Microsoft 365. Other than that, again, want to thank you all for joining us. We've got our contact info up here on the screen. You can follow us on Twitter, certainly send us email. those QR codes go directly to our LinkedIn profile. So please feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And what do we got coming up next?
Stream bonus episode.
We're gonna be living the stream next week, people.
Just gonna
Love
be
it.
flowing the streams of consciousness that we have here. So how many more stream puns can we come up with between now and next week? But yeah, just notice that it is on Monday next week. We've got a little bit of a scheduling consideration that we need to work out. So rather than our normal Tuesday, we're going to be doing this session on Monday, the 1st of June. So please join us then. And thanks so much. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Stacy. Appreciate it.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, Richard, Stacy. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.